Hello all, and welcome to Meanwhile in the West, my semi-regular video series where I complain about the letters that have been written into my local newspaper, the West Australian. So, 1st of March 2014, an eye for an eye. Surely it is time to bring back the death penalty as a punishment and a deterrent. The case of the British soldier, Lee Rigby, randomly murdered by extremists, cries out for a suitable penalty, and this definitely does not include imprisonment. Trev Adams, Broadwater. Yes, a suitable penalty for somebody who's committed murder in this country is life imprisonment with possibility of release only upon the governor's pleasure. Now, we did used to have capital punishment and we got rid of it. And the reason we got rid of it partly is because it doesn't work as a deterrent. It simply doesn't. I mean, you may accept it as punishment, punishment fits the crime and all the rest of it, but we know that it doesn't work as a deterrent. In fact, we know that deterrent effect from punishment is a greatly has ever reducing gains. So you only need this small punishment to get a deterrent effect, and as you ramp up the punishments you get less and less deterrent effect. And I would have hoped that somebody living in a country, Australia, that is founded on convicts being sent out here for committing relatively trivial crimes, so deportation with no hope of repatriation for trivial crimes, would understand that the deterrent effect of a punishment is very, very limited. And secondly, why are we arguing for the death penalty brought back in WA when it was a British soldier who was killed in Britain? Anyway, next one. Seeking asylum today, also from the 1st of March 2014. Mike Best, Living Rough, letters 21st of February, needs a reality check if he believes asylum seekers deserve better treatment than on Manus Island. These people have left home and flown to Indonesia. If they were genuine refugees, and I've never heard of a genuine refugee who could afford the airfare, the story would end there. However, these tourists pay people smugglers to ferry them here. Federal government is cleaning up Labor's mess and should be allowed to implement reforms without criticism from those who, by supporting the opening of floodgates, have denied genuine refugees in UN camps the chance of protection and meaningful life. Jeff Appleby, 2J. Okay, so first of all, the reason why people are arguing that asylum seekers don't deserve to be locked up in Manus Island in squalid conditions, or at least what we take to be squalid conditions because actually there's no journalists or independent monitors allowed in. The reason we're arguing against that is because we don't believe that anybody deserves to be locked up in those conditions. And regardless of what they've done, we don't believe murderers should be locked up like that, and we certainly don't believe that asylum seekers who have committed no crime at all should be treated like that. Secondly, the fact that you've never heard of a genuine refugee who could afford their airfare doesn't really give it much weight, in my opinion. I don't know much about refugees, and I suspect that you know bugger all. Thirdly, even if they have money, that doesn't stop them from fleeing persecution. The whole test for an asylum seeker is whether or not they're fleeing persecution in their home country. Nothing to do with their economic situations. So the fact that their family probably has sold whatever assets they could get their hands on just to get the people onto a boat to come to Australia does not weigh against their claim to be a refugee. Also, calling them tourists, that's silly. I mean, that is just stupid. And lastly, the idea that Labor created this mess is stupid. Labor were the ones who introduced mandatory detention. It's not like they're soft on refugees. They've been every bit as harsh. I mean, for goodness sake, Labor wanted to send them to Malaysia. Labor wanted to send them to Malaysia. So they would get here, they'd try to claim asylum, and we would just ship them off to Malaysia instead. I mean, Labor excised all of those maritime zone, all of those little islands around Australia. They said, no, they're not Australian for immigration purposes only. So they're totally Australia when we want them to be, but if you land there, you haven't reached Australia. That was Labor who did that. So don't pretend that Labor are somehow soft on refugees. Liberal and Labor are both as bad as each other when it comes to this. They're both at a race to the bottom to be as harsh as possible on refugees. And the idea that they've denied genuine refugees in UN camps, there is no line, there is no queue. These people are not jumping a queue because there is no queue. In fact, a lot of these people would be in UN camps if there was any possibility of them getting resettled. Anyway, enough from my rant for that letter. Next one, 3rd of March 2014, axe the baby bonus. Why are we paying parents to have children when in the main the money is not always spent on the child's upbringing, health or welfare? Save the kids, 2nd of March. Most parents are not asked, are you expecting a boy or a girl? It's more like, what size TV are you going to buy with your baby bonus? Free contraception and no baby bonus is by far a better future for Australia. P. Bradshaw, Wanderer. Now, P. Bradshaw, I actually agree with you that free contraception is a great idea. I actually think that should just be standard anyway. And I also agree that basically the baby bonus should be scrapped. And if we were going to keep some of it, it should be for the most poor and needy of people in society. But the idea that most parents are not asked whether it's a boy or girl, but rather what size TV you're going to buy, I wonder where you're getting your information from. It's possibly from these kind of sources, would make up this kind of stuff, or have one anecdote that they spin into a this is happening a lot kind of story. Paying our way, 3rd of March 2014. I wonder how many Australian citizens who demand that our governments should spend more on public service wages, roads, schools, hospitals, doctors, teachers, power upgrades, railway services and more would be happy to pay higher taxes or charges to cover the cost of these demands. We are so fortunate in Australia having the best of everything. State and federal governments are struggling with budgets. How about we all appreciate what we have, stop being greedy by always asking for more, and let them get on with trying to balance budgets. If we're not happy with how they do that, we can tell them so at the next election. Viv Murray, Salter Point. Now, Viv, I for one actually would support paying higher taxes in order to fund those kinds of things that I support. Roads, schools, hospitals, doctors, teachers, etc., etc. Now, first of all, you've mixed up a whole pile of things. So some of the infrastructure is paid for by local governments, some by state and some by federal. But let's ignore that for the moment. I would support paying higher taxes, and I'd actually support paying them through the rollback of middle class welfare that I'm a recipient of. So I would like to get rid of the baby bonus, or at least limit it to people who truly need it. I would support getting rid of the private health insurance rebate, or at least limiting it to the people who really need it. I would support a huge amount of getting rid of the tax breaks for superannuation contributions, because that almost entirely goes to people who are rich. I would definitely support getting rid of negative gearing tax concessions, because that also goes to people who are particularly rich and it isn't actually helping the rental market. So yes, I would support us all paying higher taxes to get these kind of things. So when you ask how many, I wonder how many, I don't know how many, but certainly I'm one of them. And secondly, the idea that we have the best of everything here, and that we should appreciate what we have and stop being greedy, that's silly. I appreciate what we have, and what we have here is fantastic. Do we have the best? Well, in some ways, but not always. Some things about living here are not the best, and we should be striving for the best. And also, it's hardly greedy when the poor in society ask for a little bit more help and assistance from the government. That's not green greedy. That's just that is just a sensible request. I mean, that's what the government's there for, to help the most needy. And the idea that if we're not happy with how they do that, we can vote them out in the next election, well, possibly, but that's only us collectively. That's not me. I can't vote out the bastards. 3rd of March 2014, gays in Uganda. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I didn't hear our esteemed Prime Minister Tony Abbott support US President Barack Obama's condemnation of the recently enacted Ugandan anti-gay laws. These laws amount to an anti-gay witch hunt in Uganda. They inflict harsh prison terms on gays and lesbians and encourage violence and killings of gay people. By his silence, Mr. Abbott endorses what is happening in Uganda and must be condemned for doing so. Leon Harrison, Leaderville. Now actually, Leon, I actually agree with you on most of this. I think that the laws in Uganda are appalling. I think it is the responsibility of all people to speak out against them, particularly the leaders of all countries, but being Australian, I think that, Tony Abbott totally should speak out against it loudly. The fact that he isn't doing so isn't actually an endorsement. It does, I guess, in one sense it is, but it's not that he endorses these laws. I don't think many people in Australia would endorse these laws. Very few people would. What it is that he doesn't have the spine to stand up for what is right when it's not going to win him votes, and it's going to remind people of all the other anti-gay stances he's taken here, which admittedly are nowhere near as bad as what's happening in Uganda, but he's not exactly a friend of gay people. 4th of March 2014, children and parents. I've always respected Carl O'Callaghan's efforts to make WA a safer place. My respect grew when he spoke in public about his son's problem. But to remove children from dysfunctional parents? Again? Instead, don't governments have the courage to contain excessive supply of alcohol by legislating for shorter opening hours and cutting alcohol advertising on TV, especially at sporting venues? Pauline Stone Bateman. I hardly think that the complex intergenerational issues that these families are dealing with, where you may have 4 generations of unemployed, sexually abused, substance-using addicts living in one house that is rife with crime, poverty, people who, where you've got people who were forcibly removed from their parents when they were young for no other reason than being Aboriginal, surprise to surprise, didn't learn good parenting habits when they were growing up, have huge amounts of trauma that have not been dealt with, and you've got all of these people living together. I hardly think that the sole solution would be shorter opening hours for bottle shops and reduction of alcohol advertising on TV, as much as I support those. 4th of March 2014, ear bashing. I constantly read about kids being let out well after their bedtime, unsupervised and under the influence of alcohol or drugs, and menacing society with no respect for themselves or the public. I appreciate Carlo Callahan's concern, but delegating another government agency will not solve immediate problems. Parents of concern need to face the music, and kids of concern need discipline, full stop. Clip around the ears has missed an entire generation. Richie Broughton, High Wycombe. The fact that you constantly read about kids being let out well past bedtime, etc., is just a reflection of the media that you consume. If all you're reading is this newspaper, or all you're watching are some of those commercial channels, then of course that's all you're going to see. And it is not going to give you a balanced view that actually these are a very small number of people as a whole across our society. It's a very small percentage. And while these are big issues for those families, and possibly for the people who live nearby them, these are not massive issues as society. I support the spending of lots of money to deal with this, and I think the resources and the legislation needs to be updated so that we can support it, but let's not blow it out of scale. Now, the idea that parents of concern need to face the music, well, most of these parents are in and out of jail anyway, and a lot of them will be drug addicted, a lot of them will have been raped, a lot of them will have been victims of domestic violence, non-domestic physical violence, all sorts of sexual violence, all sorts of child abuse themselves. So I'm not quite sure what music you're going to make them face, which you think is going to have an impact on them. If those kind of deprivations that they've been through, and those kind of trauma that they've endured is not enough to convince them to do what you want, I don't know what you think is going to. And the kids of concern needing discipline, full stop. The idea that a clip around the ears is what's going to fix them is absolutely insane if you think about the kind of trauma these kids have been put through. Most of them will have been raped. Most of the ones who haven't been raped will have been sexually assaulted in other ways. A lot of them will have been beaten repeatedly by, not just by parents, but other family members. And the idea that it's the clip around the ears that's going to fix them is frankly simplistic. Anyway, that's it for my rant for this week. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I look forward to ranting again next week. See ya.